Okay, so you've probably heard that Amazon bans you if you use public domain. At least that's what they say in all the writing groups. But is that true? Well, it is true, up to a point. And then after that point, it's no longer true. And using public domain on Amazon is what we're going to cover today. Hi novelteers, I'm Devlin Blake, novel writing and self-publishing expert, coach, published author, and former ghostwriter of 200 books. If you'd like to work with me, check out my links in the description below. So, back to public domain and Amazon. Let me break down how Amazon feels about public domain. Amazon is a business. It wants to sell books. It wants to sell lots of books. And if everyone uploaded Frankenstein, for example, because that is a public domain book, and you can legally do that, but not on Amazon, nobody would buy the book. You don't need more than a few copies of Frankenstein floating around. And from Amazon's point of view, 1 million identical copies of Frankenstein floating around isn't going to make them much money. Especially when you can read out-of-copyright books for free online anytime you want. That's why Amazon has the rule, no public domain books. But you know what Amazon will love because it will make them some money? A fresh, new take on Frankenstein. A retelling, a reimagining. I would say maybe one written from the monster's point of view, but Frankenstein kind of is written from the monster's point of view at some point if you've read that book, so you know what I'm talking about. Maybe do one from Elizabeth's point of view. And if you don't know who Elizabeth is, it's because you haven't read the book. She doesn't show up in most movies. But we'll go into why you should read the book in a moment. You can even introduce a servant who wasn't mentioned in the book to be your fresh take, because there was likely a servant somewhere in a book like that. Mary Riley did this with the retelling of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from the point of view of a servant. Now, if you've ever read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know that servants were not really mentioned that much other than he had some. They certainly didn't have any names, they certainly didn't have any personalities, they really didn't have any part in the book, he just had some. So, it's not unbelievable at all that Mary Riley would have been a servant of Jekyll's and have her own take on what happened. Basically, you're doing exactly what Disney does when it comes to the movies they make. They go back to the original source material, change everything about it, and slap their name on it. And when you do that correctly, you can actually get a new copyright from the Copyright Office. In the United States, at least. And once you have your new copyright, the story you created is legally yours. Notice I said the story you created. No one can own the original story. Not you and not Disney. That's how public domain works. That's why you need to go back to the original source material the story comes from and make your own changes to it and not count on Disney's version, movie version, or any other version other than the original source material. So what kind of changes can you make to it? Most commonly, it's the point of view character. For example, Wicked, which was the Wizard of Oz retold, Mary Riley, which was from Jekyll and Hyde, From Hell, which was from Jack the Ripper, which is not a story but an actual event, but they turn it into a story. And many others come from completely different stories when you change the point of view of the characters. DC learned this when they made Joker. But of course, Batman and related properties are not public domain, so don't touch Batman. And DC also learned the second way of doing this for their stories, which is setting the story either much earlier or much later than the normal story takes place. This is what they did with Batman Beyond, which was Batman in the future, and Smallville, which was Clark Kent in the past just discovering his powers. Again, DC properties and Marvel properties and comic book properties in general are not public domain, so leave those alone. But you get the idea. So what is public domain? Well, in America, anything published between 1926 is in public domain. That includes many Lovecraft and Dr. Seuss stories, but not all of them. You'll have to check. And some things have special copyright. Sherlock Holmes, Peter Pan, and a bunch of others fall into this category. You'll want to check to see if they've got special copyright. There are also many more later things that are in the public domain as well, such as the horror comics from the 40s and 50s, like the ones Tales from the Crypt used, and certain movies, like Night of the Living Dead, which never actually had a copyright in the first place. But to know which ones are out of copyright and which ones are not, you'd have to do actual copyright research, which is beyond the scope of this short video. I go into making stories more your own inside my Novel Writers Club. We also have a weekly crit, group coaching, self-directed courses, and a whole lot more. You can find it at the link below. Other ideas you can use to make a public domain story your own is to change the genre. Disney does this all the time, and there's no more famous story they did this with than The Little Mermaid, because if you've ever read the original, which was The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, or the original that was based on, which is the story of Undine, those are not romances. They do not have happy endings at all. The guy does not get the girl in the end, and vice versa. In fact, everybody dies in both of them. And they did that again, Disney, with the Snow Queen. Whatever Frozen is, that is definitely not the story of the Snow Queen. You can also change the characters, or you can remove some characters, or add some characters. Disney did this with Beauty and the Beast. Gaston and the whole enchanted furniture thing was their idea. They also made Belle an only child and her father an inventor, when in the original he was a merchant and she had older sisters. Another way to change the story is to set the whole story in a different time period or even an alternate world. This was the approach that Ever After took, which is a retelling of the Cinderella story. This is also the approach West Side Story took, which is based on Romeo and Juliet, as well as The Lion King, which is Hamlet, with a happy ending. Because the original Hamlet does not have a happy ending, which goes back to changing genres. You can also combine many public domain characters and tropes into something new and different entirely. Shrek did this quite successfully using characters like the Magic Mirror, ogres in general, the damsel in distress, the three little pigs, the fairy godmother, and a whole lot more, even the gingerbread man. Hotel Transylvania was another series that did this. They actually took characters from famous out-of-copyright monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, and then put them into their movie, into one whole world where originally they're not in the world at all in their original books. Fun fact about Hotel Transylvania. You'll notice that Frankenstein in that version is large, but does not have bolts in his neck and is not green. That's because those things are actually trademarked by Universal. That's their version of Frankenstein. Nobody else gets to have that. So you want to make sure you have your version of Frankenstein, or whatever other character you choose to use. Whatever else you decide to do with the characters, just make sure to give them some personality, or no one's going to care what you do with them. And if you need help doing that, check out my Creating Compelling Characters course inside the Novel Writers Club. The link is below. And have fun retelling a story. This is Devlin Blake, author and book coach, saying right on.